limited formal graduate schemes, so they didn't know where to do. There's no clear entry points into these sectors. There's real focus on social capital, so it's like who you knew. Trying to get tailored information was really difficult. They were struggling with the key skills that they needed. They weren't being taught in the degree. Then they didn't know how to articulate those particular skills. Role models didn't exist in this particular area, and then they were struggling with their time as well. And when I started to look at this actually applied to so many other underrepresented cohorts. So this is looking at with mature students, with commuter students, disabled students, those with carrying responsibility. This was bringing in so many underrepresented students who were also dealing with lots of these things as well. So I started off with final year students with their transition, then I looked at first years, I looked at a subset of mature students, I looked at just English students, matching them with their alumni from the course and took their feedback. Then I went and talked to 40 creative academics, and this is where this is all sort of started to come together. It's like, what is actually happening with this particular sector? I was particularly looking at it through this systems theory framework. So when I was talking about this in Manchester last year, I was having a group conversation, and somebody very kindly, Tom, said to me, "You're not being critical enough," which surprised me because I come from a family who are extremely critical, and I should be really good at this. So my initial aims. So why do students choose to study this? What would make you go, I'm going to quit what I'm currently doing and go and study music? What does meaningful employment mean to these students? What do they consider success? What specific barriers do they have? How relevant are the core skills that they're being taught to the workplace? So that's where the alumni conversation came in. And then how can we support these students? So how do we support them to reach their potential? And I was specifically looking at these two theoretical frameworks. So I have the systems theory framework. My apologies, this is so small. But also the sustainable career ecosystems theory by Will Donald and his team as well. And I thought these were quite interesting in terms of looking at influences. But, I've gone to
press.
It hasn't worked.
It hasn't worked, yeah, so we have to keep going. Yeah, it's all right, okay. So these are my initial ones. This is what I was initially looking at. Hang on, it's gone. Apologies. I don't think the animations are working, so I'm actually losing.
Oh, if it's not in presentation mode, the animations are not going to work.
This is not going to work then.
No.
Because I've lost half of my stuff. All right, I'm just going to move some of the boxes and we're just going to go with it. Nothing is not adaptable. So hang on, let me see. Hey, surprise, surprise. I don't know how to delete in Spanish or Portuguese. Okay, so these are the two frameworks I was looking at. Oh, sorry, this is not working.
No.
Okay, hold on. It's exactly the same here. I was looking at these two particular ones. But then when I started looking at the critique with this particular group and with students at the edges and with marginalized groups, I was like, what happens when the individual actually bypasses that meso layer using technology to access the macro? How does this system actually accommodate the students who are going, do you know what, I'm just going to create my YouTube channel and get my information to the world without following the channels that they would normally be expected to do? They've literally just jumped a couple of layers. Chance is in the blue little diagonals there. It's like, how much should this actually play a larger part for non-linear careers? At what point was it was just a conversation? It was just happenstance. I don't think this is just needs to be these level 3. For marginalized students, should the meso macro layer actually be larger? Why are these all the same size? And this got me thinking about like the influences and why does this actually look at this? And then I looked at it and went, how many influences can one individual carry? This is a really heavy system which is set up. When it came down to the bottom one, I'm just going to move this little box. Hey, look at this. Okay. No, stay there. Okay,
We have to hold it.
Oh, okay, fine. I just hold it up. When you look at it, you can't see the middle circle. It's quite difficult to see, but you have the student, you have the organisation, and you have the career development professional. So those are the 3 little circles in the middle. But what happens if the career development professional is systemically excluded? What if I, as a career development professional, is not allowed into timetable, is not allowed to talk to students, and they have to come to me, but they're being told not to come to me by the other people in the circle? So what happens with that particular one? What happens if the university doesn't recognise the value of careers or the subjects that they're doing? We had a PVC, Pro Vice Chancellor, who said in the media that we don't need more students of 5th century history, we need more scientists. Now that was a really awkward graduation because none of those history students shook his hand as they walked across the stage. What happens when you look at the investment that goes into other subjects, but then it's not being invested in the other ones? The students say that. They say that like, we don't have a careers fair, we don't have representation. Who decides how to measure desirable and undesirable outcome? Who decides what that is? You can't see it here because of the little screens in the way, but when you come over here, we have desirable and undesirable outcomes. Says who? Who decides that? So what metrics are we using? And then who defines sustainable? And what does this look like by sector? So for some sectors, it's going to be, I got this job by this level by this time, and you can see the progression markers. But when I was talking to these students, they were like, I don't care what I do. I just want to work with something within this sector. That is success to me. And if I can make a living with this, I don't need the big money. That's sustainable to me. So this is where I was starting to think through these particular ones. So, oh, hold on. Yay, there we go. So these are my new questions from my previous one. How do we factor in the difficulty of transitions? How do we support the students who have come from a linear conveyor belt career system of do this exam, which leads to this exam, which leads to this exam, and then they get to the end like, well, where's my job? And if you're studying law or medicine, that is a pipeline, and it's quite clear the whole way through. It's linear. These students don't have that. Okay. How do we address variables in the individual input and the capital available? Not every student is going to present the same amount of capital. How do we level that up? Okay. How do we support the students who need more? Should we be leveling this up? Is there a bigger problem? Are we asking students to do stuff? I know we should be a little box here. Let's move this one up. Okay. Where's the individual agency in this influence? You also influence. Everything in these circles seems to be piling in. There doesn't seem to be anything to allow the individual to move within it. And then are we asking students to decode a system they've never been prepared to access? So when you think of like first generation students coming in, mature students who haven't been to school in 20 years, and we're giving them this language that they haven't been taught how to decode or what this looks like. They think, well, this is just a CV, and then they go and get the job. And that's not how it works. And let's go this way. Okay. Are we trying to retrofit coherence to nonlinear past to make sense of the past instead of how to move forward? So these two systems are really good at going, oh, that's what happened. That's what happened. You know, this explains this, but it's all looking back and it's trying to fit experience into a system as opposed to how do we use this to move forward? And then this one really annoys me. Are we encouraging adaptability and resilience instead of addressing precarity in a larger systemic issue? So we're telling students, this is a really difficult area. You just have to be resilient. Actually, there's no funding. There's no jobs in this particular area. It's really hard to get into. You have to know somebody. And there are so many barriers at different points. Can we address these issues, please? As opposed to telling people to buckle up, okay? My last few ones down here, okay? Why does this just feel so claustrophobic? These systems just feel like there's just so much pressure. There's too much on that one person. How do we give the person agency within that? And then how do we show that power is not neutral? So within that, it's just saying that everything is the same, but actually it's not, and different people are dealing with different things within this. So with all those questions, this is what I came up with. All right, so I'm going to try and explain this because yes, we have the systems theory. Yes, we have sustainable ecosystems theory. What if our view is wrong? So what if, I'm sorry, this is so little. We're looking at this space on. What if we turned it on its side and expanded it out? What if we looked at this in a different way? And what if we had something that looked more like this? So this is the systems theory framework on its side. It's the same thing. So you have the individual down here, but then these are all the influences down. But look at the space in between them. Okay, so to me, this should be fluid. This can move. Sometimes the macro is going to be a huge influence. But sometimes it's not much. It's going to be the micro is going to be the bigger problem. I think these should also be bigger and directly impacting the individual as opposed to seeing as a head on. Hold on. My little key stakeholders are still here. These need to be closer. And I don't think they need to be defined as well because we are dealing with students who don't have access to careers guidance, who don't have access to that social capital, who their stakeholders might be just that one parent at home cheering them on. And one of the biggest cheerleaders I found with this particular group was mums. And was my mum said, I could do this. I could absolutely do this. All right. But then we've taken the systems theory, we've turned it on its side, we've flipped it up. Why don't we turn it the other way around as well? Because we need to give some individual agency here. Okay. So what about how the individual actually influences the micro, influences the meso, and influences the macro? So there's more fluidity and moving within it. So instead of it being a static circle that you see where everything is happening to that individual in the middle, why don't we just look at the same system, but from a different viewpoint, and then let's give the individual agency around it. So That's where I'm at. I have no concrete answers. I'm still gathering evidence and I'm still campaigning for this particular group. But we're getting there. And I am well under 12 minutes and happy to take questions after.
Almost exactly 12 minutes.
Yes, yeah.
Very much. So you kept the sign perfectly.
Yes.
And what I will do,
Okay.
sorry, you're moving the,
This one?
No, that's mine. Next to it.
the next
No.
to you. Yeah.
No, yeah,
that
Did it?
that one,
This one?
that one.
Let's do this one.
change it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's fine. Yes.
But we need to, I think you need to click, but
You can- Yeah. Sorry, I can't see far.
Yeah, we can get presentation mode to
Yeah.
work, so we have to click on.
Because it didn't work before. So we tried, but
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
it was freezing after, so we just couldn't use it. Maybe we can use it now.
See?
Yes, that's happened
Yeah.
before.
And then it will crash PowerPoint.
But it can be just, give it some time? No?
No.
We
Really
were
fast?
waiting like
Just
a
press it.
few
Yeah.
minutes, yeah, and then it just didn't happen.
So.
Yeah.
Do you think I was moving all those shapes?
Just for fun. There was
I have
an easy
these
solution.
beautiful in the airport.
I do wonder if within
Maybe we,
Teams, if you share the whole screen
May I?
rather than the.
yeah,
Which computer
sorry?
is it? I think it's this one, right?
this is controlling that computer there.
Yeah, that's one thing. Yeah.
Yep. That's nice completely.
Yeah, that's what it does. That's what it
So-
does.
That's why we decided.
Unfortunately, I think I'll have to close Microsoft PowerPoint, yeah. Sorry. Tried to help, but apparently it is a little bit,
At least we tried, so
yes, sorry.
you never know.
So basically this
That's
one, right?
right.
Yes.
Yeah. Straight. Maybe if we click this,
Maybe we
it
move
might
this.
work,
Yes.
you know, rather than the presentation, just.
Where?
Yeah. Also the window, the Zoom or whatever. Oh, yeah, even in this one.
Yeah.
A bit back.
Maybe
You just
on
put the
the,
view on the other
not the
side?
presentation down there, but like a different view. The reader view, this one, yes, that's gonna, I think. It doesn't wanna, oh, it's still pressing. It doesn't wanna, sorry. Sorry, try to help.
Yep. What?
I love technology.
Yes. Yeah.
We all try to help and it just doesn't work.
This happened in my last lecture.
Okay, we'll
The
just,
whole thing.
Yes.
Did not work, nothing connected. The technician did have to go rummage around the back, which made me feel better that it wasn't
okay,
me.
just, yeah, then just, yes,
And down.
that's the best.
I know, it's all right.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'm gonna turn.
I'm so sorry, I can't see very well far, so I will just.
Yes,
Definitely.
maybe, I don't know, maybe we have stopped sharing the screen. I don't know if you're only seeing the screen. Is it? Is
Oh,
it sharing?
I don't know.
Oh, we don't know.
Yeah.
So let's see if we're clearing the screen.
It isn't, but we'll see. So basically the issue is that every time we stop, we try to.
Could we share the whole screen instead of?
Yes, of course. No,
Instead
no,
of.
não, 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 não. Deixa estar. Simplificar. Porquê? Porque de cada vez que tu tentas fazer.
Ok.
No, I'm ready. So are we okay? Yeah, okay. 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 No, that's okay. Thank you very much for the support. So we tried everything, but you will see. So there is some kind of reflection and connection to your presentation as well. So I think we have this kind of, I wouldn't say push, but something towards to be more critical even during the research and the research phase. So when I went through on my presentation today, I just realized that there are so many connections to the yesterday presentations, and then it's really nice to see that how it comes together when we're talking about the research. So I will talk about the privileged experience that expatriates have. So when we are talking about expatriates, it's somehow their careers is embedded in the entire system. So whenever we are talking about them, we can't take out only an individual career, but it's embedded in the social system, in the family system, and all together. And whenever they make their choices, it's connected to the context that they have around, and we have to look at that. Something interesting, so I don't know whether you had experience with the research on expatriates. So there are the management scholars who are talking about and defining them as a concept of being expatriates when you are moving abroad, as opposed to the social science who mostly talking about them as a migrants. So it's already a conceptual confusion in between. And there are a few scholars who already started to put that together and try to analyze it from a different perspective in order to really define the concept. And we had the same issue. We had the same issue with the career, that how we define and conceptualize careers overall, whether there is one definition or whether we have to look at that from different perspectives. So what I'm presenting today is connected to the research we conducted during the COVID. So that's a crisis situation and what's happening in a crisis situation. But we also mentioned yesterday that uncertainty is not like happening once. It's an overall situation, because there is always something that we have to adapt to, and that was the same situation with them as well. The research didn't directly asked for or address the question about privilege. So that was the secondary analysis of the data, being more critical, being more or going more profoundly into the data and understand what's happening and whether this privilege is existing or not, or we are just define that. So whenever I presenting that, for example, and I ask people in the conference before the presentation whether you think that expatriates are privileged, most of the people are saying yes, they are privileged, and then they have to critically really think about that. And the perspective that I would like to highlight here is there is a kind of structural vulnerability that we are not talking about in terms of expatriates most of the time, and relational inequality, and also that they can also experience exclusion, especially during a crisis. So this is the little bit of background, and I want to keep the time. So some of the slides I will just take it more quickly and faster. So when we are talking about their experience, we always see opportunities that, like going abroad, some benefits in terms of career, some progressions, flexibility, and a kind of privilege that we define somehow. But also there are vulnerabilities. So there is also this kind of duality that we have to understand how is it working and why is it working in this way, and what is it behind. So in terms of their privilege, we can look at that from social comparison point of view, but also from the freedom of the mobility, which was granted before the crisis. And the social comparison, we look at the resources and opportunities that they have, whether they have access to that on a continuous basis, or it can be constrained. So looking at that, I wouldn't say only social embeddedness, but we have to look at that like the psychosocial point of view, because they have so many context around that we have to critically analyze it. And for example, when we are talking about the global hierarchies, expatriates perceived as a privileged group. But when we are talking about them from the social comparison point of view, we see also the differences in how it's constructed and how it can be constrained. And looking at them as a social group, it makes it easier to understand their, I wouldn't say position, but their place in the system. It's quite dynamic, and this is how I want to connect to your presentation, that it's very important to look at from the micro, meso, and macro level as well, because we see different dynamics in between. However, here, for example, as opposed to the one that we saw in your presentation, the individual part is coming to the micro level. So we see them here, and then we see for example, their coping strategies, can be look at that on the micro level. And then we have the social and the community as the circumstances. And then we have the macro level where we can see this kind of structural constraint that was not very much analyzed before, or not in this way in terms of expatriate and their careers. So I already mentioned the social comparison, how it's come together, but also in this one, it's very important to look at that from different perspectives. So not only on the individual and social level, but we can see also that there is a temporal comparison, there is a past, future, and present comparison, there is an upward, downwards, and then favorable, non-favorable. So it's an entire system that we have to look at. And then this is how we can understand how they perceive themselves within the society, not only within the expatriate society, but also the society they live in, for example, in their host country. So there is another framework that we applied as the expatriate identity framework, which was quite narrow in terms of like looking at their identity. There was identify the personal, the relational, and the social identity. The relational is not purely the connection, but it's their role-based identity. So what kind of role they have within the organization, what kind of role they have within the family. So that's the relational identity they identify. And for example, in instance 1.5, they identified these as the main components of the identities, but somehow this is not enough to understand their privileged position and their perception regarding their privilege. So this is just a little bit of background of the research that we conducted, and this is how we try to understand how they perceive their privilege. So if you see that there is the temporal composition, there is the downward and upward. And interestingly, for example, the macro level, so when we are talking about their downward and upward comparison, we understood only the upward comparison as the macro level. So this is where they were structurally constrained in their perception, privileged perception. And that was the first time that they mentioned during the research interview that they experienced a kind of racism. They experienced to be an outsider, and they experienced not being part of the society or the local community as well. So here comes back to for example, yesterday we were talking about belonging and not belonging, political belonging or individual. So how you perceive this kind of belonging, and this was the first time that they don't have that anymore. So again, it's very important to look at their experience from a multi-level dynamics perspective and not staying only on the personal level. And then what we saw that on the macro level, so the structural context, it's so important because this is how they experience different kind of restrictions, for example, during the crisis. And that was not only in governmental restriction, but they could have experienced also kind of institutional ones we identified as also as a macro level context. So in terms of their privilege, it seems to be a very dynamic concept, and this dynamic concept is a kind of paradox. So from one side is structurally reduced their privilege, from the other side is structurally constrained. And the question arises, but before that, I just want to show this one. So we call that structurally positioned identity. So if we refer back to the previous experience, expatriate identity, where we had 3 different parts, so the individual, the social, and the relational one, it seemed to be not enough to understand this kind of experience that they had as losing their privileged position. And here it comes the macro level that is also important. And a question, if I may have to you just to think about, whether you feel structurally position identity a term that you can accept, or whether you question that, whether you can address that differently, or whether you feel that it's really an answer to this kind of experience that they had, because that's an ongoing conversation that we have for years now, and we try to find the right term and concept and prove that critically, and then to speak critically then what else we can or we should take into consideration in order to define this experience that they have. And this is the privilege paradox. So one side is constrained and the other side is constituted. And one more thing that I wanted to highlight being at the end. So there is a very important ethical question and implication, and it's an ongoing question that whether we should really support the experience of being privileged as an expatriate. And it's a very big responsibility from researcher point of view, as well as from organizational point of view. From the other side, when they had this kind of coping strategies for the crisis, for example, they had good strategies on the individual level, on the social level, but they didn't have on this kind of structurally constituted positioned identity level on the macro level, because they were constrained to the governmental and the legal and other regulations. So the questions whether what we can do, whether we should really do something, and how we can really support them when they feel that much losing their position what they had before. And that's the end, because it's 12 minutes. So thank you very much. And in the next one we have Anna.
It's sharing. That's good.
It's sharing, yes. Okay. Let's just. Okay. By the end of that, we'll get it. So, hello everybody. I'm Anna Smoska. I will present today a part of a research, so very early stages of research that was initiated and is ongoing in one of the subgroups in working group 1. So as you can see, there's many names there coming from different countries. The main idea behind the research was to actually understand the institutional barriers and institutional forces that shape careers of early career researchers in academia across national context, because we started talking about, career paths in one of the meetings, and we all realized that there is something that is not explored. Usually people view academic careers as based on principles that are universally acceptable, that are meritocratic, that allow mobility, and all is well and good. In reality, what researchers and academics face is fierce competition, a rise of precarious contracts in recent years, and culture that is actually, publish or perish, where you either go up or you vanish from academia. What we also discovered is that prior research has mostly focused on individual level outcomes, so like resilience, motivation, satisfaction, and so on. There has been very few studies that looked at how structural and contextual mechanisms influence and shape academic careers, and early career researchers were really understudied. What is actually happening is that they face limited track positions at the moment. Funding is getting lower as we progress, and most of the early career researchers are in so-called soft money positions, where their paychecks basically depend on the project that they work on. So we try to basically implement social justice theory onto careers, understanding the narratives, and basically So far, the research and practice are still embedded within the mainstream line of thinking, and we want to see what is going on deeper, where we understand that, if we take the social career justice stance, we should look at addressing various types of injustice that people experience at work. We're also trying to look at some ecological or basically macro and micro variables, so kind of borrow something from the systems theory to see how different levels of factors shape career development and kind of influence this power imbalances that we were kind of aware that it exists within academia, but we didn't have much proof to actually talk about it. And we are also looking, because through the research, certain psychological variables do emerge in terms of individual capacities to cope with the situation. So what we are also trying to look at how differences in lived experiences or intersectionalities, so individual level variables, basically interact with the more macro or contextual level variables to produce various levels of asymmetries in the daily working lives of early career researchers, and how those personalized identities basically interact with the institutional structures and broader academic culture to affect individual level outcomes, and how individuals basically create space for development and their own personal satisfaction. So what we did, we initiated a cross-country study. At the moment, we have 4 countries where we collected data, basically Turkey, North Macedonia, Portugal, and Croatia, and we're expecting data from Italy and Germany to be added to this body. We used qualitative methodology with a semi-structured protocol for the participants. We are trying to address 3 research questions, basically study the institutional policies, practices, and so on, the intersection of social identities with those policies and practices, and then how those early career researchers basically navigate, adapt, try to change the structure and construct their own academic career path where they would be satisfied with what they think career should look like for them. At the moment, what I'm going to present is data from 16 participants, mostly coming from Turkey because it's the largest country, and then a smaller number from the other 3 countries, mostly females. The youngest is 30 years old and the oldest is 48. So we have mixture of natural and social sciences. We don't have humanities or arts yet. And as you can see, only 2 reported having permanent contracts. So most of our sample is coming from people who basically are still on part-time contracts, fixed-term contracts. 2 are still PhD students, and so on. And we have 1 person who basically transitioned out of the academia due to the precarity that could no longer be managed. So the main findings, I'm just going to present the initial coding. So we still don't have a lot of the critical lens applied to it because we are still collecting the data. But the main themes that are coming is that for them, there have been certain key or critical turning points during the career, which were basically shaped by the interaction of factors like mobility and structural constraints, and certain identity transitions from one profession into academia. What we basically found was that people that are in the position of early career researchers had to initiate their own turning points in the career. So, for example, taking mobility in a different country to finish a PhD because opportunities were not available in their own countries. Or basically having to choose a dual career path because you could not sustain yourself solely based on the academic career. So what we are finding is that the turning points are non-linear. They're not, you cannot say that there is one key turning point that you can find across the board. And it's much more about individuals basically creating their own sort of career anchors as they go along, because the system is not giving them a clear and predictable career path. Although this is in contrast to what people have taught previously, where in academia you kind of have a fixed path that you can follow, and it turns out that that's not the case. The academic environment basically provides a lot of fragmented opportunities, higher workload than if you have, let's say, more fixed or more permanent contracts, and basically there is a lot of uncertainty embedded in career advancement, which is kind of necessary if you want to stay within the academia. So formally, what we find is that in all the countries, the academic careers are merit-based, but only on paper and in theory. In practice, there is a lot of unequal opportunities. There is a lot of uncertainty. There is a lot of fast change or unpredictable change. So, for example, we have people that, for example, in North Macedonia, the law has changed 4 times in the past 10 years. And they say, well, that this criteria not being, constant can actually discourage young researchers from staying into academia. Or, for example, in Turkey, people complain about being heavily burdened with teaching rather than research, although you do have a research position, which is something that is kind of really precarious. The institutional policies also shape early career, trajectories through creating a lot more pressure on the individual rather than providing opportunities for the individual due to those hierarchical structures that exist, due to this financial precarity where you don't know whether your contract's going to be extended, and of course, workload intensification on early career researchers. So basically, the institutional policies don't support academic careers in practice. They actively produce or reproduce those conditions of uncertainty and inequality, and of course pressure on the person and not the system that is basically existing or being reproduced in all the countries. To the degree where basically people have stated that they sometimes have to cover research stays or research from their own paychecks just because the institution does not support them equally to somebody else that is in academia. This ties with the supporting mechanisms, which I mentioned are basically few and far between for early career researchers. Mostly what we find is, again, there is a lack of structured systemic support for early career researchers to develop their careers. They're more fragmented than they look on paper. Basically, in practice, even if something exists on paper, it's not going to be implemented to enable early career researchers to thrive. They reinforce basically the patterns of precarity that we have basically found. So as a result of that, early career researchers perceive the support systems to be fragmented and insufficient, and they reinforce basically emotional strains and precarity in early academic careers. So we've basically found that there is a lot of negative impact on emotional well-being of early career researchers as a result of everything that is going on. Again, the social identity, or this is where we are looking to the intersectionalities. What we find is that they do shape academic careers. Early career researchers have to navigate their own personal lives around, academic conditions, and basically identity is seen as shaping their careers, but they're not, it's not preventing career progression, but you have to work around it, especially if you come from, let's say, a certain group, like if you're a female, or if you come from certain background that is not, giving you enough support. So they use a lot of different career navigation strategies, like relying on informal networks, using external opportunities, tying with people from different countries, But this is all individual-based initiative and it's not structural support, which basically means that a lot of the pressure is on the individual still and not on the system. And early career researchers basically feel that they cannot change the system. They don't have the agency to change the system yet because they're not well connected or embedded within the academic circles. So in conclusion, what we find is that the academic career of early career researchers in different countries are filled with constraints. They're non-linear. There is a lot of power imbalances and there is a lot of inequality built into the academic life. So what we can basically see is that there is a lack of so-called decent jobs for early career researchers. They feel overburdened and overloaded, which basically leads to negative mental health consequences. The intersectionalities basically push early career researchers towards different career navigation strategies. And individual agency still is the key to career development rather than institutional support. So thank you very much. I'm gonna hand the floor over.
Thank you very much. And then we have Daisy.
You have to.
That's okay. You don't need all of my notes. There we go.
Is it still sharing?
I
think I can-
yeah,
yeah.
the red box.
Yeah, yeah.
That's good. I'll just speak that a little bit, not too much.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to start my here, but so hi everyone. So my name's Stacey. I'm an associate professor at the University of Leeds, but I've also just completed my doctorate at the University of Sheffield, which is why I've got the Sheffield branding on my slides. So today I'm going to talk about my MD thesis, which was looking at the career decisions, journeys, and trajectories of academics who identify either as working class or as coming from a working class background. So there is a Bourdieusian sort of link to this, of course, from habitus to advocacy, but that will hopefully become a bit more apparent. I'm going to see if I do that. Oh, yes, perfect. So the provocation that I sort of started with this is there such a thing as working class academics? So that came from Paul Wakeling back in 2010, stirred up a lot of discussion and kind of conversation between people who say, well, yes, of course, there can be. But it was something that kind of started me thinking about this sort of track and trying to understand if somebody who is typically, who's come from a working class background with working class sort of habitus and capitals, etc., can actually navigate quite a middle class space, or what is often perceived to be quite a middle class space of academia. So that was the sort of starting point. The question I always get asked is, can I define class? What do I mean when I'm talking about class? And the actual first line of my thesis is that class is an essentially contested concept, and it absolutely is. It brings lots of discussion, lots of challenge, and lots of kind of useful sort of critique as well, which I think is really helpful. So I'm not blindly sort of saying, yes, class is absolutely 100%, the most important thing, but I do think it exists. I do think it's important. So that's particularly the case for me, I think, in academia, where roles are generally seen to be quite middle class. But lots of academics do still identify either as actively working class or at least acknowledging the difference that they've had in their background. And there's a quote here from Teresa Crew, who's written a lot about working class academics over the last few years. And this quote really kind of epitomizes for me kind of how I feel about it. So she notes that the material conditions of my heritage have a lasting impact on my identity, especially in a hierarchical institution like academia. So even if I might not feel really strictly working class now in the same way that I was when I was growing up, actually it's still having an impact. It's very different from if I'd been quite privileged the whole way through, right? So I like to use McLean's definition, Chloe McLean, who talks about working class referring to those with little to moderate economic stability. So there is a socioeconomic element, but also whose cultural tastes tend not to be valued or endorsed by the state. So it celebrates both culture and the positive association of being working class. So Geraldine Van Buren talks about how, well, why would we positively associate with low socioeconomic status? Like we wouldn't, but people do positively associate with their working class background. So it's combining both the socioeconomic status, but also that celebrated class culture as well. And I thought the bit there about endorsed by the state was quite interesting. So if we're thinking about power relations and power dynamics, we might think about universities being potentially reproducers of state norms, values, inequalities, for example. So there we go. So why did I choose this topic? I always think it's important to talk about positionality, of course, and I kind of had to in my thesis. So I'm a white working class woman. I came from a low income background, first in family. I was on the various contextual admissions programs when I applied to university. And a few years ago, I participated in a project by Charlie Davis at the University of Nottingham called Academics of Working Class Heritage Talking. And I know when I first volunteered for that, I was like, oh, I don't know if I'm working class enough. Like I was still very much early on in my kind of thinking about this. But I took part, and that was a series of story circles where people at Russell Group, so research intensive universities in the UK, were talking about their experiences of navigating those spaces. I do have a background in career development. It's been there either implicitly or explicitly throughout my whole journey. And I'm really interested in kind of career development theories and how we can use those. So there's loads of research. I mentioned already, Theresa Crew has a huge body of work around working class academics, but I thought there was something maybe specific about career journeys for working class academics. So that had been very implicitly covered in a lot of the work, but hadn't really been explicitly sort of pulled on. So conceptually, I was trying to work out what theoretical framework I should be using. My supervisors kept pushing me on this because it was the bit I probably felt least comfortable with. And Bourdieusian sort of work is ubiquitous. So when we're talking about working class academics, it's everywhere. And I really struggled with trying to understand whether I should use Bourdieu or not use Bourdieu, because in my head I was like, well, it's everywhere, that means it must be the right thing to use. But then I also thought, well, maybe because it's everywhere, I should use something different. And I was really interested in how do I bring career development theories into this, and I came across a very timely moment, Gander's holistic career framework, which is what's on the screen at the moment. And this has nested fields. So we have a social field, which has vocational personality within it. There's a sector field, which kind of contains everything else, and then an organisational field, drawing on Bourdieu's ideas of different fields. And then habitus, you can see across the bottom, sort of underpins and kind of goes into all of those. And there's various aspects within different capitals within the kind of diagrams that then leads to this unique career story. So Michelle Gander did her work with Australian universities with professional services staff. So she wasn't really looking at class, she wasn't looking at academics. So when I was looking at this, I was like, great, there's somebody who's brought in career development theories, there's someone who brought in Bourdieu, but actually, do I need to look at this? And I was really concerned, should I adapt this? You know, this is a done thing, how could I adapt it? My supervisors very gently encouraged me that you shouldn't use something that doesn't work for you, but you can adapt it. So I did. And here is a much smaller, it's horrible on the screen, I'm so sorry, but a much kind of, this is my adapted version of Gander's framework. So I added in a few different things that I thought were missing. So one thing was adding in actually where some of the concepts that she'd used actually did link to career theory and explicitly naming those, just because I thought that was probably easier for people who maybe weren't super associated or super familiar with career development theory. I added in bits about early vocational capital within the social field section, because I thought there was something important there about choice, about the decisions that get made earlier on in our kind of educational choices, for example. And then I added in a career decisions bit to the sector field, because I think as academics, sometimes academics can make choices about which institutions, which organisations to go to within a sector field. And that actually might be quite different from what she needed for her study, where professional services staff might feel that their kind of skills and development might translate more easily across institutions. And then I added in a few other bits within the organisational field, And again, really focusing on what I found was actually really important, both within the literature, but also for my participants, was ideas of resistance, resisting sort of dominant narratives around career expectations, but also something there around advocacy. So actually, how do we start to leverage the fact that working class academics have different experiences? And I'm going to be way out of time, but this is move along. So my methodology, a critical realist approach, and I had 3 interviews with each participant. I only had 6 participants, a really small sample size. I wanted more. My sort of positivist hangover decided that more would be better. But again, my supervisor sort of encouraged me that with this I would have 18 interviews. So I had about 20 hours of data, and that was plenty. Academics and people who signed up for the project were very chatty and very happy and generous to share their experiences. So I had lots and lots of stuff to go at. So interview 1 was very focused on career journeys to date. So I asked them to produce a career timeline to help us sort of navigate and understand that. And I got them to do that as homework in advance, partly because I thought it would be useful as a prompt, but also to get them thinking about the topic before they came to that first interview with me. The second interview, so each of them was about 2 weeks apart. The second interview looked at their current job role, and I asked them to get their crystal ball out and think about what their future career trajectory might look like. And that was interesting because obviously some people had a really clear plan in mind, other people thought not at all. One person was planning to leave academia, so that brought up a whole lot of conversation, which was really cool. And for interview 2, I asked them again a bit of homework to use photo voice or photo elicitation, and I asked them to find a photo that they felt represented their current job role. And again, it wasn't to share it later on, it wasn't for anything other than really to help prompt discussion and to encourage them to think about that topic in between interventions interactions. So actually Louise Folks talks about the waiting field, and she talks about it from an ethnographic perspective, but I think my experience on the Academics of Working Class Heritage Talking project made me realise that as a participant I also had a waiting field if there was multiple interactions, and actually giving me something to do and think about during that time, not too burdensome, right, quite a light task, but giving me something to do and think about actually meant that I came to interview 2 or further on in the sections for the AWCHT project. I came to it feeling a bit more kind of in the mindset, in the frame, and I maybe reframing things along the way. Interview 3, so they didn't have any homework for this one, but I did ask them to reflect on interviews 1 and 2, so I'd given them their transcripts, the member checking, and I'd asked them to reflect on those transcripts, and then I gave them my research questions and said, here are the research questions for my project. What do you think about these? Here's, based on a very, very light touch kind of look at our first 2 interviews, here's what I think you might say, but does that map with what you actually think? And that was really helpful because it kind of validated what I'd already thought, some of my interpretations of that initial data, but it also allowed participants to say, yes, that, but also actually this. So one of my research questions was, is class, what other factors other than class influence the career journeys of working class academics? And one person said, well, yeah, I do think class is really important, but actually I think gender is far more important. So whilst I tried to acknowledge that there was an intersectional lens, etc., actually that gave them the opportunity to really influence my interpretation of their data. So I'm going to skip through this really quickly, because I've got a minute left. So I had a range of participants, mostly women, and lots of different career roles, different levels of kind of roles. So people who are relatively early career and people who are professorial stage and have been quite a long time. So mix of different institutions and different locations across the UK as well. So to analyse my data, I used Mautner and Dowsett's voice-centred relational analysis, also sometimes called the listening guide or the reading guide. And there's 4 read-throughs here. Again, I'm conscious of time, so I'm not going to go through this in lots of detail, but it was a really cool analytical framework. I spent a long time thinking about what should I do. I was going to just do thematic analysis, or going to just do it, but that just felt like the default. And then when I came to do it, I found it just didn't feel right. It didn't feel like the right method for my project. This allowed me to read through and platform participant voices in a really kind of powerful way. And it was really relevant for lots of reasons that I'd be happy to talk about after this session. So I put in some example findings because there's loads of stuff. I've kind of tried to pick out some interesting ones. So working class academics have non-linear trajectories and complicated access points. Of course they do. So one participant moved into an academic role after working in professional services, much like myself, which they described as coming through the back door. Another worked in as a practitioner in a clinical discipline before parachuting in from industry. They called themselves a pracademic. There was a lot within the data around cultural dissonance, so feeling that there was a kind of, they've said here, my experience of being in universities has been very alien, familiar with lots of academics who have not got a background like mine. So there's that sort of kind of navigating those different sort of norms and values and doxa, etc. And the habitat advocacy, the title of this, is very much thinking about how there's a lot of emotional labour for working class academics in terms of navigating these spaces that don't feel familiar for them. So imposterism, which go back to Emma's presentation, thinking about almost that hyper individualized idea that you don't feel as though you belong, therefore it's a you problem, you need to develop your adaptability and resilience, rather than acknowledging those big systemic environmental things that we need to be concerned about. But also cleft habitus, so people having again those different experiences from the habitus they developed when they were children and young adults to this habitus that they then kind of do when they're trying to assimilate into higher education. But a really important thing was they'd had barriers, they'd had experiences that were challenging, but they were really, really motivated to mobilise resilience and resistance. I think I meant to put there, not resilience, but also resilience in many ways, and to develop and share the navigational capital that they had developed to help them advocate for others. So there was a real big sense of wanting to give back, wanting to help others and to navigate what they find quite difficult. So there's a bunch of recommendations. Again, I'm well out of time, so I'm very happy to talk about this further on. But one of the things that I am thinking about is how to adapt this holistic career framework, or the adapted holistic career framework, and thinking about how that might apply to other sector framing. So not just thinking about academics, but also thinking about other professional settings. So I've got close colleagues working in law, in medicine, for example, and trying to understand whether this might still apply in those spaces. So thank you so much. Apologies that I'm over time, but yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. We have time for that as well.
Okay.
So the next presentation is going to be Anita online.
Okay. So I've stopped sharing mine. So Amelda, I think if you share yours, if you share yours, that might work. If easier than us trying to do it. I don't think we have it on. Yeah, let me just press this up as well.
Is it visible?
Yes, yes. Woo.
Okay, great. So fortunately, I'm here online instead of being on site. So it's been a chaos day, but anyway, I'm still with you. I'm Emilda, and I teach at Alexander Mosio University in Durrës, in Albania. And the topic that I'm going to share with you today is shifting sands and future paths. It's a critical look at career in precarious Albania background. The paper that I've prepared employs a critical theoretical framework which draws on theories of structural violence, post-socialist transition, and human capital flight. We move beyond individualistic self-management to explore career as a negotiation between the structural constraints and the strategic collective action. And the key question is, what is the meaning of career when the most significant career decisions is often the choice to leave the country? And concerning the analysis that offers a vital non-Western European perspective, compelling a fundamental re-evaluation of guidance policy, the contribution is a call for a career as resilience policy framework in post-transition economies, prioritizing social capital, structural advocacy, and transitional guidance. So it's a critical approach that must first address to the political economy of work rather than focusing solely on individual skills.
Sure. Can I just interrupt you for the moment? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Now we see.
Yeah.
Okay, we didn't see the change of the slide.
Yeah. So there are some key conclusions that Albania's labor market faces structural precarity driven by post-socialist transition failures and inadequate Western policy model adaptation. Career trajectories operate as continuous negotiation processes between individual agency and systematic constraints rather than linear progression. Furthermore, systematic reform requires integrated policy framework addressing institutional capacity, social safety nets, and skill alignment. Furthermore, there is a triple threat framework. So the threat dimensions are related to economic instability, institutional weaknesses, and skill mismatch. And I have divided them into the manifestation and impact that they have. So concerning the first one, the economic instability and the manifestation of that is that informal sector dominance, wage volatility, and the impact is that employment insecurity and income unpredictability. The second point has to deal with the institutional weaknesses. So we have got weak labor enforcement, limited social protection, and there is a vulnerability to exploitation and risk exposure. And the third component, the third dimension is the skills mismatch, education employment gap, outdated curricula. So it reduces competitiveness and career mobility. Then let's go to the fractured landscape. So concerning the Albanian context, so Albania comes from a post-communist regime, and there are failures during the transition, incomplete market economy, transformation, leaving hybrid institutional structures, weak enforcement of labor regulation despite legislative frameworks, persistent informal economy accounting for a significant employment share, great drain of skilled workforce, creating talent deficit. I mentioned previously a little bit about the Western policy model, that it has got inadequacy in Albanian policy. So the transplantation of Western labor market models has proven insufficient because models assume institutional maturity and rule of law, foundational absent in Albania. Second, neoliberal frameworks prioritize flexibility without corresponding social protection mechanisms. And third one size fits all approaches ignore specific post-socialist recovery needs and path dependencies. Another framework is the one of structural violence concept. So concerning the analytical dimensions, we have three. First of all, we have the direct harm. It explicit constraints on opportunity access, and it limited job availability in formal sector. Then the second dimension is systematic barriers, institutional mechanism that perpetuate inequality, and relevance to Albania is that weak credentials, recognition, and network effects. Sorry. The third dimension has to deal with power asymmetries, unequal nation capacity in employment relationships, and relevance to Albania is that vulnerable workers lacking collective voice, unfortunately. Let's have a look at the post-socialist positioning. So the transition characteristics, and then the structural violence manifestations. I mentioned a little bit briefly that the path dependency from central planned economy creates distinct labor market features. Privatization processes generated precarious employment patterns lasting decades. Social safety and OT erosion increased individual vulnerability to market shocks. And concerning the structural violence manifestations, we have wage suppression through informal employment and unregistered work arrangements, limited access to professional development and skills upgrading opportunities, and restricted social insurance coverage, leaving gaps in employment and health protection. Career as negotiation process, individual agency versus systematic constraints. So careers in precarious contexts require understanding as dynamic negotiation, where workers continue to adapt strategies responding to the market volatility and institutional limitations. Decision-making reflects balancing immediate survival needs against long-term development aspirations. Success depends on accumulating social capital networks and adaptive capacity alongside formal credentials. Let's proceed with the negotiation dimensions. So individual employer, worker manager, and the primary issues are wages, hours, so working conditions, and so on. Sectorial, workers, employers, unions, and the primary issues here, industry standards and collective agreements. And concerning the other dimension, institutional one, is the government, civil society, and the issues have to deal with the labor law, regulatory enforcement, sorry. A new policy framework for career stabilization. Here you have got, you can see the pillars, policy pillars that are integrated. So institutional strengthening, social protection expansion, and skills development systems. Concerning the first one, it enhances labor inspection capacity, transparent dispute resolution mechanism, and credible enforcement system. The second one, social protection expansion, universal unemployment insurance, portable benefits, and income support to transition periods. And third one, demand-driven training programs, recognition of informal credentials, and continuous professional development pathways. Which are the implementation priorities? Short-term actions like established labor standards monitoring system with transparent reporting, pilot income support programs targeting highest vulnerability sectors, launch skills assessment and validation initiatives for informal workers. And concerning the medium-term reforms that last from 1 to 3 years, strengthen collective bargaining frameworks and worker representation mechanisms, integrate formal and informal sector workers into unified social protection system, and implement employer compliance in incentives through certification and public recognition. Concerning the didactic methodologies, for the career development, so educational training approaches, reflective practice modules, sectoral case studies, and simulation-based learning. The first one has to deal with the systematic analysis of career negotiation experiences and adaptive strategies. Second one, in-depth examination of precarity patterns and resilience mechanism across industries. And third one, role-playing negotiation scenarios and institutional navigation exercises. And here I have divided a stakeholder group, workers, employers, and policymakers, the learning objectives and methodological focus of them. Let's start with the first stakeholder group, that are workers. Negotiation skills are very important, right awareness, adaptation strategies. And the focus is going to be on interactive workshops and peer learning cycles. Employers is a second stakeholder group, objective labor standards compliance, sustainable workforce practices, and the methodology is going to be focused especially on the best practice seminars and certification programs. And the third one, the policymakers, evidence-based reform design, implementation monitoring, and the focus is going to be on the research dissemination and policy labs. which are the strategic imperatives to move beyond importing Western models toward contextually grounded institutional development, recognize career precarity as systematic challenge requiring integrated multi-level interventions, and prioritize structural violence reduction through simultaneous institutional, economic, and social policy reforms. So what is the vision for sustainable career systems? Effective reform transforms career trajectories from survival negotiation into genuine pathways for development by establishing one, predictable institutional environments with transparent rules and credible enforcement, comprehensive social protection, reducing vulnerability to economic shocks, and accessible skills development systems enabling continuous professional advancement. Thank you for your attention. Hopefully, I've been very short and cutting straightforward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Even though I thought I was talking to myself because I'm not used that much with this online speeches.
That was great. Thank you very much. And you kept also the time perfectly. So you're all done. Thank you all for the presentations. And now we have more or less like 10 minutes. So invite 10 minutes for questions and comments, whatever you have for the presentations for Anil as well, or for the in-person presentations.
One question, Stacey. I was wondering whether, like, you found that something that is very specific to the academic environment that you cannot see in other professional settings, any sorts of middle class professional settings.
I think it's hard to say because I haven't done the research in those settings, and obviously I know that's kind of the next question is does the kind of framework translate to other settings? I think in terms of specific to academia, probably nothing super specific to academia. I think actually a lot of the experiences are navigating, are more around navigating traditionally middle class spaces. I think the non-linearity is quite interesting, and I think it links back to what was said before. I think you were talking about how actually there's expected that there is this model, that there is this sort of linear path that you go from this to this to this to this, and that actually really feels like it is quite different in academia practice compared to other sectors. Like, again, I talk about colleagues like in law, where that does seem to be a little bit more kind of linear, a little bit more organic. But working class academics do seem to have had quite different experiences. So I think it's a good question. I think it's kind of what I've got in mind next to try and understand as well.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments?
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to kind of got a specific question for Stacey, but I've perhaps also got a slightly wider question. So I think my worry with what you're doing is like that so the way that we construct politics is there's class politics and there's identity politics. And what you've done is pull class politics into identity politics.
Yeah.
And really, that's the opposite of what I want to do. And I suppose because well, I mean, I understand because you're coming from a sort of sociological, like Malthusian perspective, but my worry with it is that you take what is a set of economic relationships and you turn it into identity, and by turning it into identity, you basically and I think this is one of the worries I have before the Malthusian work generally, is that you render it as an individual responsibilised problem for people. Like people, okay, you thought that you become it's the way in which you interact with the system that's the problem, rather than the fact that the system is like structurally violent to you.
I think that's the opposite of where I landed, but maybe that didn't come across. But absolutely, you know, I completely reject the hyper-individualized idea that it's you are the problem. But I also think, I suppose I also kind of challenge this idea that I've drawn in class politics to identity politics, because I think actually talking to working class academics, they feel that their class identity is a huge part of their academic careers, and it's a huge part of how they perceive their identity within this academic space, rather than it being something separate or different. It's a fundamental part of who they are, and not just the socioeconomic factors, but also those cultural factors as well, which they celebrate. They're talking about their working class values and how that is something that is important to them. They talked about how their their flavour of working classness, and this is almost a verbatim quote, gave them an audacity to navigate and negotiate the sector. So I think I think the class politics and the identity politics is actually more integrated than perhaps we can give it credit for. I think in terms of how it's lived and experienced. And then also, yeah, I completely reject this idea that we should be hyper individualizing. That's not where I landed. I completely landed on there is systemic change, and that's where the recommendations weren't about individuals going and doing better things. It was about systemically, how do we start to think about understanding class, not just rejecting class as an important facet of a working class academic identity. We accept it, we understand it. But yeah, I could talk about this for hours. But it's interesting because I hadn't thought that it might come across that way, but perhaps it has.
I mean, I'm not really, I'm not sort of like challenging what you're saying. I'm more
wanting to look at it differently.
Well, yeah, and I suppose like if you come at it from a more sort of Marxian perspective, like class is, the distinction you're making between middle class and working class is not, that's not how Marxists see it, is it? So I suppose and that's where my worry with it is that you, by creating it as identity, I mean, one of the reasons why people create it as identity politics, because that's the like space for contestation that exists, because like a more political version of class is basically that's very difficult to contest it on that basis.
Yeah. No.
I mean, I suppose my slightly bigger question for other people as well is, which I actually heard in the last presentation more than in any of the others, is the issue of power. Because that a lot of you operate off of basically systems theory type approaches, and what worries me is that you have these these structures of how things are organised, which we recognise to be unequal. But there's not much. You don't have a theory of power. Then how do you contest that really? Like, because you just sort of go, well, there are these structures and they're not fair, and people then have careers that they can't find their way to decent work and so on. But you have to say, well, somebody's doing that for some reason and they're getting something out of it in order to say, well, it's something that can be done about it.
Well, it got me thinking, because I come from a system similar to Albania, where we had one system that kind of collapsed and the new system was created. Well, not created. I don't know. We kind of still don't have the fully market-driven economy, but we don't have the protection that existed in socialism, let's say, whatever previous system. But then you realize that the power imbalances were also embedded within the system that was kind of supposed to be more egalitarian. And I personally, I would like to contest the notions of power, but sometimes you have to realize that people sometimes kind of give up on contesting the power, and they try to kind of navigate the system as best as they could, because sometimes the power is like Leviathan. So you can't, people perceive that you can't attack the system, but you can navigate it through your personal agency advocacy. You try to change it to a certain extent through various modes that you have. You either do research, or you try to climb the ladder, which is, something that we try to contest, but in reality, that's what people try to do. They say, okay, if we jump here, then we will attack the system from there. I don't think we are being successful so far. And that's the main issue, that we do try to attack it, but the system kind of fights back. because there's a lot of people that are just comfortable with how the system looks like. It works for them on various levels. And then there's people who just say, well, why should we bother with something that
Or it's never gonna work.
it's never, or if we try to do something, it's never, I mean, at least in North Macedonia, the people are sometimes at the point where like, why bother changing something? Because with every change, we're not, we're not progressing, we're just reversing or something like that. So you have, it's much more complex when we're talking about changing the power dynamics and systems and all those big things that have sort of existed for forever, in a way. If you look historically, there has always been some sort of struggles. I mean, that's how you change the system when you try to contest the.
If I can make it sector specific, so I think what we have, like when you think of the creative industries, we think of like legacy media,
Yeah.
which is like state TV, BBC, all printed papers, all that sort of stuff. And then we have this new media that's coming out. And I think when it comes to let's challenge
Yeah.
the par, that's what the students I'm working with are being really creative with and doing. So yes, you have the standard media narrative that yes is happening, but then these young people now are going, no, and I know I can't access this because I don't have time to go and get the unpaid volunteer experience because I've got 3 part-time jobs. I don't have the contacts. I'm first in family. I don't know the language. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to access this. So I'm going to create my own. And you have this legacy, this standard one that's like, I can't access it, but partly I don't want to access it. So I'm going to create my own, and they're putting on their own film festivals and they're creating their own opportunities and they're finding their own funding. And they're kind of going, yes, the power is over here, but I don't kind of, yes, they want to be creative, but I don't necessarily want to be part of that system to be creative. So they're choosing to make their own stuff. And that's kind of where they're going. And when you look at like how quickly YouTube now is going, and you ask young people, where do you get your news from?
Yeah.
For good or bad, they're going on Instagram. They're not looking at different things. They're getting their information from different places.
Yeah, but then that's another system.
It is another,
still
another system. But this other system then is privileging people who are good with IT and can navigate that and know and then know how to be critical to think within it. Otherwise, you just get down into the algorithmic rabbit hole. So are they replicating another system? But they definitely don't want to be part of that one.
Yeah, but they're creating their own.
They're creating their own system, which comes with its own problems.
I mean, within that system of social media, we've had people from Macedonia that actually helped Trump win twice. So. And they're based in a small town in Macedonia. They've made a lot of money based on fabricating fake news, and no one can actually shut them down because they're not operating within US.
Operating within this,
So, but they've created.
They're coming outside like a system.
They are within their system within the system. So
power is always going to be there.
Yeah.
So how do we help people to be critical within it and navigate it?
Let's delay a little bit. I must say, my perception of systems theory is a bit different than what is presented here. I'm coming from more quantitative background, where you are more focused on simulation and modeling. That's which is a core or system element consistent of inventing. Certainly, we need to understand what system is. We also need to understand the dynamics. Certainly, understanding the first step, but there are a couple of other steps that follows that have to be in place in order to fully call it system theory. So typically for my research, I'm just talking about from my research perspective, the leaders that are using social science and most popular nowadays, they use basic system theory, system dynamics, as in those kind of which I'm going to talk a little bit later in the afternoon. I'm not making it up, you can come to my. But the idea is that how do you model dynamics in order to control the system? That's the final output or the halt of this, or the purpose of system theory. So you have a model, you have something that's close to whatever the real system is. Things change, okay, then my model will also change. And how will that affect in the future? So the system that you build or the model that you build should give a forecasting capability of what will happen, rather than understanding what is currently happening in the place. So again, that's coming more from technical engineering perspective, very different than in that sense. But again, it's not difficult because there are a lot of developed model out there. You do not need to develop model completely from scratch, and nobody do that. Even most complex, what we call digital twins, which is an identical digital copy of the reality. You do not do it from scratch. You can use a lot of already existing elements and build that up. And that's even you look at Horizon Europe project, very few projects are building everything from scratch. Okay, so it's not difficult to use that as a sideline to compare your results. And that's quite straightforward. If you search system dynamics, career, or job, you'll find loads of models. Loads of models. And you can use that as a place very easily. I mean, I teach my students to do research, and they are not built exactly the same as what you want, but you can add a lot of that. It's 1 or 2 hours work. Again, it's a different insight. That's what I want to.
I think that Imelda had her arm raised up. Yeah.
Yes, Emilde? Emilde?
Was it?
No, Emilde. No,
Imelda.
Emilde. Can you hear us?
Yes, I do.
Okay, do you want to
Okay.
come? Yes.
Yeah, I
Do you
just
have
had a
this
question
like
for myself
one
and
more
for
minute?
everyone, just a quick, short one. So what is the meaning of career when the most significant career decision is often the choice to leave the country? Is it the same in your countries? So in Albania, it functions like this, that people, so students, let's say my students, just studied university just to get a proper job. But the tendency is to leave Albania. Now, the question that I directed to myself is that what's the meaning of career when the most significant career decision is often the choice to leave the country? Does it happen the same in your countries, or it's kind of a global issue?
So it's the question to everyone.
I think it's to everyone, but probably you can offer some input to this.
Based on the problem first. Yes, I think it's changing a lot, and especially after the AI, after the remote work, it's changing really a lot, the context of global mobility. So we see less and less movement and migration, but it depends on the countries, it depends on the circumstances, it depends on the jobs as well. But there is a big change nowadays, and then there are less willingness to move, especially after COVID. And now it started again, but knowing and adapting the remote work circumstances is getting better and better, and then they want to stay instead. Yeah. Thank you. If you have any burning questions, we are very happy to take. Otherwise, we go for the coffee break. Thank you very much, Amilda. Thank you to everyone.
Thank you for this amazing session.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Enjoy your coffee
Bye.
break. Bye.
Guess someone's gonna come and.